Seemingly from nowhere, the practice of having drag queens read books to young children in libraries and schools has spread across the world and is coming to a primary school near you. Initially simply storytelling, the inevitable mission creep has led to toddlers being subject to full-blown drag shows, replete with lip-syncing, gyrating and twerking. To its adherents, Drag Queen Story Hour sparked a cultural movement promoting tolerance, self-expression and the greater understanding of gender diversity. Yet for many parents, exposing children to adult entertainers is too much, far too soon, and, as is so often the case, it has become a new battleground in the culture war. But where did it come from? Why do people want to do it? Well, sit back and relax, because I'm going to tell you a story, the history, or herstory, of Drag Queen Story Hour.
It's called Drag Queen Story Time.
Drag Queen Story Hour.
Drag show story time event for children.
Drag Queen Story Time.
Drag Queen Story Hour.
In Western culture, drag can be traced back to ancient Greece and Rome, where male actors would don women's costumes and masks to portray female characters in theatrical productions. This tradition continued throughout the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, with Shakespearean theatre featuring male actors in female roles due to societal restrictions on women performing on stage. The term drag itself is thought to have originated in the 19th century, possibly as an abbreviation of dressed as a girl, referring to male actors wearing women's clothing in theatrical performances. As theatre evolved and became more inclusive, allowing women to perform on stage, the nature of drag shifted. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, drag began to take on a more subversive and political tone, with performers using the art form as a means of critiquing societal norms around gender and sexuality. Drag has always been transgressive, fun, late-night entertainment for adults. However, in recent years, there has been a concerted attempt to get these recusant ideas into the classroom.
Drag is for anybody and everybody who wants to put on a fun costume and get up on stage and entertain people. Everybody should try drag at least once. It's really fun.
Even kids?
Yeah, there's actually quite a few kids that are starting to do drag.
Drag Queen Story Hour is the vanguard of that change. In particular, there has been a determined attempt to educate children into a certain cultural idea about the political role of gender and sex, emerging from queer theory, an academic movement that has in recent years been passed from university campuses to popular culture to business and ultimately to nearly every single one of our foundational national institutions, schools being one of the most important. The origins of queer theory lie in the postmodernist intellectual movement of the mid-20th century. In 1976, Michel Foucault, definitely not a paedophile, French academic superstar who famously argued that children could give sexual consent, published The History of Sexuality, a revolutionary work which argued that sexuality was a societal construct, shaped by the forces of culture and history. For Foucault, sexual behaviour was a victim of the power struggle, constantly constrained through the media, our institutions and the cultural practices we have evolved to regulate and normalise sexual behaviour. A generation of academics desperate to challenge the cultural status quo built on Foucault's, most notably a little-known lesbian anthropologist called Gail S. Rubin. In 1985, Rubin, who made her name exploring American gay fetish culture, published her seminal essay, Thinking Sex: Notes for a Radical Theory of the Politics of Sexuality. Rubin introduced the concept of sex/gender system, arguing that sexuality is not a natural phenomenon, but a product of cultural norms and social institutions. She argued that these cultural norms were oppressive and had no basis in nature, and that our ideas of sex acts being inherently wrong or immoral were simply cultural constructs. She took aim at every sexual taboo, infamously writing, "Boy lovers are so stigmatized that it is difficult to find defenders of their civil liberties, but in 20 years or so, when some of the smoke is cleared, it will be much easier to show that these men have been the victims of a savage and undeserved witch hunt." Judith Butler, a prominent philosopher and gender theorist, was also instrumental in shaping queer theory. In her groundbreaking book, Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity, Butler introduced the concept of performativity, positing that gender is not an innate characteristic but a performative act that is continuously enacted and reinforced through social interactions. This radically stupid idea challenged the traditional understanding of gender as a fixed binary category and instead proposed that it is a fluid, mutable, and subject to change. The drag queen is the essence of performativity. This is where they differ from pantomime dames. Whereas dames, who evolved out of the Victorian music hall, were always comic figures, with male actors often exaggerating older female characteristics but retaining their male gait, performed for families, drag queens evolved in a totally different context out of gay clubs and cabaret, challenging gender norms and emphasising sexuality and glamour, performing in nightclubs for adults. San Francisco, 2015. Author and activist Michelle T. felt that local children were missing out on queer culture and, to further their understanding, decided to create a unique and engaging literary event. Michelle was something of a cultural entrepreneur in San Francisco's queer art scene, having previously been involved in numerous transgressive art projects, including touring with the Sex Workers Art Show, founding the queer feminist poetry collective Sister Spit, and writing and editing numerous books, including Pills, Thrills, Chills and Heartache, an anthology hosting writing from the words of its own back cover, speed freaks, scat freaks, gender benders, shoplifters, sober virgins, cybersexualists, Tourette syndrome fetishists, and a naked butter dancer. Working with Radar Productions, a non-profit founded by T, the first Drag Queen Story Hour was initially held at the San Francisco Public Library, intended to celebrate and support queer culture, while simultaneously introducing children to diversity, equity and inclusion through storytelling. The Story Hour was a great success, and before long, similar events started popping up in other American cities before expanding right across the United States and eventually the globe. Indeed, the fact that it was controversial seemed to encourage more libraries to put on their own story hours. As The Guardian reported in 2018, it riles the right, but delights the kids. The idea that drag queens are simply another vessel for storytelling is dishonest, though. Drag queens are now being routinely used to teach children the basics of queer theory and gender ideology, vigorously contested ideas which are being taught as fact rather than the basis for a discussion. In the Isle of Man, a drag king was brought into school to teach children the basics of gender ideology, and when the drag king told the class there were 73 genders, an 11-year-old child questioned this and was excluded from the classroom. It's funny, though, when you seek gender reassignment surgery, that you only have 2 options. When speaking to their own audiences, advocates are quite open about the political purposes of these activities. In the paper Drag Pedagogy, the playful practice of queer imagination in early childhood, the authors Little Miss Hot Mess and Harper Keenan wrote that Drag Queen Story Hour was positioning queer and transcultural forms as valuable components of early childhood education. Who couldn't get behind that? To state it plainly, within the historical context of the USA and Western Europe, the institutional management of gender has been used as a way of maintaining racist, we're onto racist now, and capitalist modes of reproduction. And Drag Queen Story Hour offers a queer relationality with children that breaks from the reproductive futurity of the normative classroom and nuclear family.
I hope we see one. Me too. I love rainbows. Amazing. Me too.
Like many activist groups and movements, proponents of Drag Queen Story Hour are extremely skilled at using taxpayers' money to educate and indoctrinate taxpayers, or in this case, their children. Public libraries in Britain and America often find space in their meagre budgets to cover the expenses such as event organisation, promotion, and of course compensation for the performers. In the UK, some Drag Queen Story Hour events have received funding through the Arts Council, England. In 2019, the British Library hosted a Story Hour event as part of its Gay UK Love, Law and Liberty exhibition. I missed that one. These events don't come cheap. In 2022, New York Public Library spent over $200,000 of public money on Drag Queen Story Hour events, finally drawing the ire of its critics. In a rush to counter any criticism, organisers like to stress that the performances happen in safe environments and that their acts are shorn of X-rated content. The aforementioned Little Miss Hot Mess, author of The Hips on the Drag Queen Go Swish Swish Swish, in an interview with New York University, responded to criticisms of the programme by declaring, "We conduct background checks, do trainings on how to work with children, develop curricula to make sure that this is safe, accessible and age appropriate."
On the Drag Queen Go shimmy shimmy shimmy.
Oh yeah.
Anybody know what a shimmy is? Shimmy shimmy shimmy.
I think I have that
Shimmy
at
shimmy
home.
shimmy. The shoulders on the Drag Queen Go shimmy Shimmy, shimmy, shimmy.
But how rigorous are these background checks for a program explicitly designed to challenge authority and sexual norms? So, leaving aside convictions for drug or violent offences, in total 7 drag queens who have performed in front of children have so far been convicted of child sex offences. Each one of these is a catastrophic failure of safeguarding. Once misfortune, twice carelessness, 7 times. And these are simply for crimes that have been convicted. What about age appropriateness? Despite their denials, leaked footage from these events has seriously violated very clear boundaries between adult and children's entertainment. In 2022, at a Drag Queen Story Hour event in the National Theatre in London, a drag queen called Sharon Legrand told the audience, which included parents and babies, we need to teach our children to open their hearts, teach our children to open their minds, and teach our children to open their legs. In the same event, drag kings took their clothes off to show their mastectomy scars, further blurring the line between stripper and children's performer. Drag kings are a relatively recent addition to the drag pantheon. In queer theory, the direction of travel is irrelevant. All that matters is that gender barriers are transgressed. The means, not the ends. As many of these acts are adult performers, one wonders what the organisers and the parents who take their children to them expect. In 2020, Hertfordshire County Council ran a drag queen story time for children aged 3 to 11 with a performer named Ruby Violet. If you Google Ruby, you'll find their profile, in which they're described as a girl with plenty of spunk, mainly on her face. In fact, nearly all drag performers have distinctive nicknames, easy for children to find on social media, and children look up their names. They will find this. A warning. Many parents have expressed concern about the sexualised and politicised nature of Drag Queen Story Hour. The BBC, an institution for which you have to pay, under threat of a custodial prison sentence, have determined that criticism is not driven by age appropriateness or political indoctrination. Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? They are the product of conspiracy theorists and the far right. Concerned parents do not exist. That is misinformation. And you, as parents, have no right to question whether this is appropriate, or you're a racist, transphobic bigot. In Canada, a law has been passed making any kind of protest near a Drag Queen Story Hour illegal on pain of a $25,000 fine. That's not very nice to people kind, Mr. Trudeau. They want it for your children, and opposition will be criminal. However, there are concerned parents who do want to do something about this. The Story in the Isle of Man forced a review of sex education on the entire island. There are plenty of good charities which provide excellent resources for parents worried about these ideas being forced on their children, and we have put up the links in the descriptions. And we have a new initiative coming, Bad Education, which will empower parents to make the choices they deem fit for their children and resist their indoctrination. Good luck.